Welcome back to another episode of the Lender Podcast. I'm Bryce Matheson, and as always, this episode is brought to you by Lender. Lender is a loan management software tool designed to help you with every aspect of your business, from origination to servicing to payoff. Lender helps you with document generation, helps you with collecting monthly payments, dispersing monthly payments to your investors, taking in new loan applications, giving your borrowers a portal that they can log into, giving your investors a portal that they can log into. Pretty much every aspect of everything that you do inside of your lending business can be done and facilitated through Lender. You can check that out by going to joinlender.com. That's LENDR, joinlender.com. Now, on to the episode. Whew, baby, it is hot. It is so hot outside. I don't know if you can tell, but I am sweating here a little bit. Typically in the mornings, I try to go for a 1.5 to 2 mile walk, and it's not even 9 o'clock yet here today, and it is over 90-something degrees here in Phoenix. So I'm still not regretting the decision to move here. The weather is still awesome, but it is hot. You do acclimate though. Okay, today I want to talk about something that I called hard nose. Basically, there are some red flags that obviously you should look for as you're lending out private capital and making sure that everything is safe and secure. So I have been lending full-time since 2022 about. So by no means am a veteran with thousands of loans underneath my belt, but I do feel like I've had enough experience to know like what are some just glaring red flags or hard nose that is an immediate deal killer for me, and I know I'm just not going to fund that loan or move forward with that project. So I have compiled a list that I call triple red flags, double red flags, and single red flags. The triples obviously are like an immediate hard no. The doubles are like still basically a hard no with some minor caveats. And then the single hard no's are still probably a no, but we're maybe going to look into those just a little bit closer. So I have compiled this list. I want to break down some of the things that I look for that is an immediate deal killer. And hopefully this can help you save some headaches and heartaches because I've had a couple. So anyway, first one, which this one should be super, super obvious. This is in the triple red flag. No, is insufficient or no collateral. Like, duh. If the collateral is not there, it's just not going to work. Or if the LTV is ever over like 75 to 80%, that is an immediate hard no. It's just not going to work. It's going to be a thorn in your side. And I have to admit that when I first started lending, I would do this all the time. I would do 100% LTV, or sometimes like even more. I would do like 110 and 120. And I personally thought that if I didn't offer, this high of leverage, that people would leave and go somewhere else. And that actually is true. Oftentimes people will be like, I can't do 20% down, or I'm not going to do 20% down, or whatever it may be. And they'll go elsewhere. And that's okay. Like, I would rather do no deal than potentially do a bad deal. They're just like, why? And I think that just comes from experience and knowing that it's okay. You do not have to fund every single deal. In fact, you probably should not fund every single deal. And if you do feel like you have to fund every single deal, you've got small pipeline syndrome. You just don't have enough deal flow coming in that you can pick the cream of the crop. There's not enough options for you to pick and choose which one is really the best. So insufficient or no collateral, higher than 75, 80, 100%, that is a hard no, instant no. I'm not going to do those. Number 2 is owner-occupied properties. As a private lender, you cannot lend on owner-occupied properties. There is like a little exception to this, like if you are, a mortgage broker or, something like that, and you have a license and you're able to do that. I still don't do it. I'm not allowed legally to, but even if I could, I wouldn't want to, because you get into different issues with like the Truth in Lending Act or RESPA or some of these other regulations that are around, like there are protections around primary mortgages. It's more difficult to foreclose on because where do people go? Whereas an investment property, it's a lot different. So under no circumstances whatsoever will we ever lend on an owner-occupied property. Now, you have to be a little bit careful about this too, because sometimes you'll have borrowers who will lie to you and they'll say, oh, no, this is an investment. And then after the fact, they will move into it. And so one little trick that I've learned is look up where they're living currently. And if the house that they are flipping, supposedly, or renovating or whatever is significantly nicer than their current primary residence, chances are they're going to be moving into that one. No. Never, ever, ever. No owner-occupied properties. You can get in a lot of trouble by doing this. Number 3 is if a borrower lacks a business entity. So they don't have, We Flip Houses LLC. They're trying to do a loan in their personal name. So if you are saying you don't have a business entity and so I'll just loan to you personally, no. That's not going to work, because if this ever goes to, in front of a judge or something like that, and we say, hey, this is a business purpose loan for investment purposes only, how are you going to justify that when you're lending to their personal name? You're not lending to an LLC. By default, you have to lend to an LLC or some other like corporate business entity type to prove that, hey, this is a business purpose loan. This is not a consumer loan. This is not an owner occupied loan. And it gets dicey. So please do not ever loan to somebody in their personal name. Now, the nice thing is, obviously, even though we're going to loan to an LLC, we're going to still have a personal guarantee. So they're going to guarantee that loan, underlying everything. But if this ever goes before a judge and there is a dispute, it's going to be very hard to justify and back up and say, that this is not going to work. The other thing that I would look for is look at the articles of organization for that LLC as well as the operating agreement. If this LLC was just barely formed, and not all the time, it's not like an immediate hard no, but if this LLC was just barely formed like 30 days ago or 45 days ago, that to me is another red flag. And then last one for the triple red flags is poor credit and a big construction budget. The default rate on these are almost always going to be 100%. Now, a couple things here. If somebody has poor credit, chances are, at least in my opinion, that tells me that you can't handle your own personal finances. And so what makes you think that you're going to be able to handle my finances, my money, if you don't have control on your own life? I realize there are, exceptions to this, like you go through a divorce or something like that, and it just kind of causes things to get nasty. But typically speaking, no. If you have poor credit and a big renovation budget, it is almost always going to default, because you can't handle your own personal finances. You're not going to be able to handle my finances. Now, there's a couple other things that go along with this. And the other thing is that people don't realize that like a I guess it depends on where you live. Maybe a $50,000 renovation might be small where you live. Probably $80,000 where I lend that's a pretty sizable renovation. For example, the largest renovation that I ever did was about $170,000. This was on a single family property that we got for $150,000-ish or so. So we bought it for $150,000. We put $170,000 into it, and we sold it for $450,000, I believe. It was a really good deal. It made a lot of sense, and it worked, and we made a lot of money, and it was great. People don't realize the amount of control and the amount of complexity is involved in a renovation that is that large. And so again, if you have a poor credit score and a huge renovation budget, that is a hard no for me. It's just not going to work. If you have a smaller renovation budget and, say $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, and you're just doing paint, carpet, maybe a little bit of drywall, a little bit of electrical plumbing, some flooring, and you're good to go, those typically almost always go significantly better. So those are the triple red flags. Now let's get into the doubles. These are like high risk situations. They're probably a no, but prove me wrong. So they just need some like additional explanation to kind of figure out what's going on here. Okay, the first one that I wrote down is a negative balance sheet, or they don't have any skin in the game. So for example, like having a borrower that has been doing fix and flip projects for 3+ years and they're still underwater. They have no liquidity to their name. They have no money. They can't put a down payment. Why? What is going on here? There's absolutely something that is not going on. And if you're still borrowing after all of these years and you can't self-fund at least some of your projects, that to me is a red flag. The other one is a first-time operator. This again, like maybe let's have a little bit more of a story to see what's going on, but I don't want to be your tuition. I don't want to be the first mistake. And I realize that a lot of people think, okay, well, if everybody were to say this, then nobody would ever be able to get started, right? Because everybody would have this requirement that, you've got to have at least 3 deals under your belt or whatever it is. I don't subscribe to that. I don't believe that's necessarily true. There's always going to be somebody who's going to give you a chance first, but it's not going to be me. Sorry, because my capital is too valuable and I have underlying investors who I have to protect their investment, and I'm just not going to be your test case. So sorry. Okay, some other ones that probably need a little bit of explanation but are typically a hard no is anything in a flood zone, anything with like a bowing foundation, maybe like mobile homes sometimes, anything that's super rural that's like less than $100,000 in value. It causes some issues with like exit complications, resale value, liquidity, insurance, just, all the above kind of like tied together into a singular problem or issue that is going to occur because they're just like weird one-off things. I would much rather lend on just a traditional house that is cookie cutter, ready to go, in and out, flip it, list it, sell it, done, boom, move on to the next one. I don't want any of these like weird, just no, especially something with foundation issues. That's not necessarily an immediate no, but typically speaking, it is. Most foundation issues are very expensive, like in the tens of thousands of dollars. And if you're a new time investor or flipper, you probably don't have enough experience and it's just going to complicate the project. I'm not going to lend on it. Sorry. Another one that is a double red flag to me is investing in a location that's outside of your proven market. Tell me why. You live in Idaho, but you're investing in Florida. I don't know. I want you to have boots on the ground. I want you to be there. I want you to be able to touch the project. I want you to have significant experience with the ARVs and the contractors, and just knowing your area provides immense value. If you try and go in and do something blind, I don't love it. And I probably won't lend on it. Not to mention, we don't lend outside of Idaho. We really don't, because I stick to this myself. I'm not going to lend somewhere that I don't understand. For example, in Idaho, I could look at a property and within 10 seconds, I can know right off the bat whether or not this makes sense. I personally have flipped over 100 homes in Idaho, and only in Idaho and surrounding Idaho and eastern Idaho. I know it. I know it very well. And so again, it all comes back to preservation of capital, my own and my investors' capital. I'm not going to lend on something that's outside of my market, and I won't lend to a borrower who is trying to invest in something outside of their proven market. So that to me is double red flag. Maybe you could change my mind otherwise, but typically it's still a hard no. The last thing that I wrote down was no executable multi-strategy exit plan. Kind of the de facto answer is, okay, so how are you going to get out of this property? Everybody says, well, I'm going to sell it. Maybe, I don't know. The market's down right now. What are you going to do if you can't sell it? Well, I'll just like cash out refi. Okay, well, your credit's awful. So how are you going to go to a bank and get a cash out refi and finance this to me? And also, what happens if rates jump to 8.5%? And people are like, oh, well, that's not going to happen. It has happened in the past. Rates have been at 8.5%. In fact, I own a property right now that has a mortgage at 8.5%. It sounds crazy, but it has happened. What happens if rates go to 10%? What if inflation gets too sticky and you can't go out and refinance? Or, they'll say, okay, well, rather than refi, I'll just get like a DSCR loan and pay you off. Okay, well, what happens if rents don't cover and you can't get that 1x or 1.2x DSCR ratio coverage? Okay, like tell me that you've put some thought into this. Tell me what your exit strategy is other than just selling or refi or I'm going to rent it. That doesn't work because my loan is not a long-term loan. It's a short-term bridge loan, and you can't just rent it. You might be able to rent it for a month or 2 or 3 to just cover your monthly interest payment, but it's not a long-term solution. I want to have a little bit more of a story to this about what's going on. So, okay, last 5 items that I have for just like single red flags or maybe like caution lights or cautionary tale. So first one is if anybody needs funding within 48 hours or like a same day decision, just like a really rushed decision. I put a little caveat out around this because sometimes there are deals that are just like too good to be true and they need a quick decision. So for example, probably 2 months ago, I had somebody call me up and they needed funding within like a day. And I said, okay, we can move quick, assuming that all of the checks are in place. Turns out this guy was trying to buy something from the auction and he didn't realize how that worked. And I said, look, I'm not going to fund this unless title is ready to go and you have title insurance. And basically he was saying, look, this is coming up for auction tomorrow. It's a $250,000 property. I'm getting it for $90,000. I had to kind of dig a little bit deeper and there's just no way. That kind of sends up red flags. Now, if it's an experienced borrower who has done 10, 15 plus projects with us specifically, and I know that they can perform and execute well, I might move forward with that. And very well could, assuming that, we still have all the paperwork in place, we have a proof of insurance, title commitment, all that. But typically speaking, a rushed decision is a red flag for me, and I'm not going to move forward with it. The other thing I wrote down is borrower dictating terms. So rates, points, fees, no down payments, no payments, you got it. So anything like that where it's like kind of like a power dynamic or something like that. No, that's a red flag. Again, I am the lender. I call the shots. If you want to use us as your funding source, you will adhere to our criteria and our rubric. And I always shouldn't say, no, I always, I don't negotiate on terms, period. We are 3 and 14 done. That is it. That's all we do. We offer 3 points, 14%. And the nice thing about that is I don't have to remember who I told 2 and 12 or this one's 4 and 14. No, I think he was 3 and 4. No, we are 3 and 14 across the board. And if you don't want to use us, that's okay. I never ever advertise that I am the cheapest, but I have people every single month who come back to me and I'll initially tell them my terms. They'll say, "Oh, that is too expensive. I can't do that." And then a week later, they'll say, "Hey, my other lender fell apart. He can't perform. Let's just move forward." I say, "Great, that sounds good." And what's funny is in the grand scheme of things, the difference between 2 and 12 and 3 and 14 is like maybe $5,000 over the course of like a 6-month loan. And if $5,000 is going to make or break this deal for you, I don't want a loan on it. And honestly, you probably shouldn't buy it either because something always happens. You have to have contingencies. And if your margins are that razor thin that $5,000 makes a difference, it's not going to work for me. And granted, would I love to make $5,000 more on a project that I was renovating? Of course. But if it is the difference between a good deal and a bad deal, I'm not going to fund said deal. So, number 3, broker daisy chains and email blasts. So what I mean by this is we work with brokers. That's fine. We'll pay them a point or whatever for referring us a deal. But oftentimes people will kind of just like, they'll put us on their email blast and they'll just like throw it out into the ether and they'll say, okay, who can fund this deal and for the cheapest and get it done fastest, whatever. I'm not going to do that. And I'm also not going to do like this word of mouth, like daisy chain telephone game where I talk to the broker talks to the, no. Like what we're going to do is we are going to get everybody on a call. We're going to talk about the terms. We're going to lay out the expectations. And if it works for everybody, great. Now, a lot of people will say, well, then you have brokers that feel like they're like getting sidestepped or you're going to cut them out of the deal. No, if you want to send me, a non-circumvent document to have me sign, cool. I am happy to do that. I'm not like, no, because that's not good business practice. If somebody's going to bring me a deal and I sidestep them, cool. I might save some money on that first deal, but I lose money for the rest of my life, honestly, with them because I burned that bridge and I'm not going to do that. So that's kind of a side tangent, but I'm just not going to operate between like this he said, she said telephone game that, you're relaying things and things get diluted. It's just, we're not going to do that. We're going to get everybody on a phone call and we're going to set expectations, go over everything so that it's, very apparent, very obvious what everybody is being held to. Number 4, incomplete track record or like sloppy documents. This again, like, maybe this isn't necessarily like a huge red flag. For me, it is a red flag. Some people just are not as organized as I would like them to be. I'm a very organized person. And so say, for example, like if you need tax returns for the last 6 years, like done. I can get it to you in literally 30 seconds because I've got my Google Drive and all my folders and everything is organized perfectly. I can get you anything you want for the last 10 years, literally in 30 seconds. Easy, done. Some people I realize are not as organized, but typically for me, if you're not very organized and it's difficult to get documents from you or they're sloppy, for example, this is kind of a strange one, but like all the time, I will ask people for their articles of organization and their operating agreement. They don't know the difference. What are you talking about? They are two very distinct documents and like you should know what these are. So people oftentimes will upload their operating agreement in both sections because they don't know what their articles of organization are. And I'm like, my goodness. So there's kind of like this standard that if you're that sloppy or that organized, that maybe makes me think a little bit twice about potentially doing this loan. And then the very last one that I wrote down, and I get this all the time, which drives me nuts, is like super low effort, cold DMs asking for money. I'll get DMs all the time that just say, hey, are you a hard money lender? I'll say yes. And they say, okay, do you do 100% financing? And I'll say no. And then like I never hear back from them. Like, no, what do you think is going to happen? I realize that this is like a transactional relationship, but let's not treat it like it is. Like this is a partnership. Like, yes, you're going to get something from me. I'm going to give something to you in exchange. You're going to pay me interest. Like it is, I realize it's a transaction, but just this low effort, hey, will you give me money DM? I'm like, No. Let's hop on the phone. Let's cultivate this relationship. Let's see how this works out. Let's see if we're even a good fit and see if the deal makes sense and see if like this is something that we want to do, because I'm interested in a long-term relationship with you because it's mutually beneficial, right? Like you have a great fast funding source and I have a long-term borrower that helps my business in turn as well. So in summation, those are my triple, double, and single red flags. These are all of the things that for me are like immediate hard nose, maybe have a little bit more like something that I need to dive into, and then some kind of like cautionary stuff that I adhere to. And these have served me very well. And obviously this just comes from experience, right? So as we've done dozens of loans over the years, these are a lot of things that I've just learned and they have served me, very, very well. So not to say that any of these is like an immediate, we cannot move forward, but still just, it's good to have your checklist there to make sure that everything is good and hunky-dory and good to go. So I'm curious what your list looks like. If there's anything on here that I missed or just you disagree with, cool. I want to hear about it. Feel free to shoot me an email at podcast@joinlender.com and maybe we'll do a follow-up episode to this. So, okay, that is it for this week's episode. We will catch you in the next one. Thanks for listening.